Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Hello, and welcome everyone to the latest forum in our Issues That Matter series. Tonight, our topic is Boundaries of Justice, exploring prison expansion, overpopulation, and impact. This series is presented by the Central Arkansas Library System, the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County, and Little Rock Public Radio. I'm Daniel Breen, News Director with Little Rock Public Radio, and I'm so honored to be guiding the discussion for you all this evening. This forum here on Zoom is being recorded for a later broadcast here on our radio station with air dates to be announced. And before I introduce our panelists this evening, I want to thank both the Central Arkansas Library System and the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County for partnering with us for this event. I'd also like to give a brief explanation of the format for this online forum. We'll be asking our panelists a variety of questions, but we also want to hear from our viewers. So if you have a question, please use that chat function down below on Zoom to ask it. Well, our panelists here tonight have received our topics and questions ahead of time so they can prepare, come with ideas, statistics, whatever they want to bring to the table. So for each question asked, participants are free to answer questions and comment on each other's input. We'll then move on to the next question. So please help me welcome our participants to the forum. We have Zachary Crow, Executive Director of DecARcerate, and joining him tonight is Kaleem Nazeem. He is a movement builder, also with DecARcerate. We want to thank you both for joining us tonight. And I should say before we start that we did extend an invitation to the Arkansas Department of Corrections to be a part of this forum. They declined that offer. Well, I want to start first off by asking you both to just tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your connection to the topic we'll be discussing tonight? And Zachary Crow, I will start with you.
Yeah. So thank you again for having me. My name is Zachary Crow. I began sort of my connection with these issues around mass incarceration and more broadly the prison industrial complex, the carceral state, as I would call it, really begins in a community in Atlanta, Georgia. I was living in a residential intentional community, 30 folks sharing a two-bedroom or a two-story house, and lots of the folks that I was living with were moving into that community either directly from the streets or directly out of prison. And so the Open Door community in Atlanta, Georgia had been there for 30 years, offering services to unhoused folks and also to people in prison and on death row in Georgia. And so I really come to this work through anti-death penalty work that I was doing in Georgia. But more specifically, because I was living in proximity with, sharing bathrooms with, living day-to-day life alongside people who were directly impacted by these issues. And that fundamentally changed me in really profound ways. I was there for 2 years. I thought of it like grad school in many ways. I learned and grew in monumental ways. But when I came back to Arkansas, which is where I was born and raised, I started looking for ways to get involved. And DecARcerate had just been founded in response to what at the time in 2015 was the fastest growing rate of incarceration anywhere in the country here in Arkansas. And so became involved as a volunteer and then the role I'm in right now.
Thank you so much, Zachary. Mr. Nazeem, thank you so much for being a part of the forum tonight. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
And I say thanks to you all and also the viewing audience. My name is Kaleem Nazeem, and I came to this work. I'm directly impacted. I was incarcerated in the Arkansas Department of Corrections for 28 years and 11 months. I started serving a sentence of a life without parole sentence in 1990. and was released in 2018. My release came by the way of Miller versus Alabama. The United States Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional to give a juvenile a mandatory life without parole sentence, and ultimately in 2018 that led to my freedom. Ever since I been released, I've been working to shine light on a lot of the issues surrounding the carceral system in Arkansas, and basically also throughout the nation. I'm a part of an organization called the Campaign for the Fair Sentences of Youth. I'm an ICANN member. I also am on Compassion Works for All board. I'm a board member of Compassion Works for All. And I just advocate, for reform in our carceral system, and also the fair sentences of youth. I feel like there's a lot that need to be done and should be done to reform our penal systems in Arkansas. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
All right, sounds good. Well, we appreciate you all both making the time tonight. Just want to, I think since there's just two of y'all tonight, we'll just go in the same order every time. Mr. Crow, we'll start with you, and then Mr. Nazeem. So first question tonight, it's kind of a three-parter. Why are people imprisoned? Who is in our prisons now, and for what reasons?
Oh,
Sorry, I had myself muted. Those are all big questions. We could spend the entire time on each part of that
sure.
three-part question. But I will try and move us through pretty quickly. We know that this has changed somewhat over time, but earlier today, I looked at the Arkansas Department of Corrections' most recent annual report to confirm what we already know. In Arkansas, while about 60% of people in prison are mostly are white individuals, poor folks and people of color are disproportionately impacted. And so we have about 60% white folks in prison. We have roughly 40% and some change people of color. We know that the prison system disproportionately impacts poor and working class folks, and continues to trap folks who don't enter the prison system in cycles of debt in our court systems. And so if you want a more sort of micro answer to that question, the Arkansas Department of Corrections 2022 annual report is finally online. It took them a little while to get it there, but it's online. The second part of that question is, well, I guess the first part of that question is, why are people imprisoned? And I think I would answer that question by saying somewhere along the way, Arkansas decided to go all in on the prison industrial complex as a way to address harm. There was a time in our state even where legislators in the legislature were debating whether or not Arkansas actually needed a prison. The prison system in the late 1800s, early 1900s was burned to the ground. And there were long conversations among the legislature about whether we actually needed a prison in Arkansas. And so the idea that prison is the only way or even the best way to address issues of harm, to address safety, has not always been a given. There are other places who are addressing these types of harm and things that we have labeled or call crime in a variety of different ways. And so I think part of the reason that people are imprisoned, at least in Arkansas, is that we have failed to think creatively. We've failed to adopt and look to alternative models that both keep people safe while also not furthering that harm to other individuals. I think the final part of that question, if I remember correctly, is what people are in prison for. The majority of people in Arkansas prisons are there for nonviolent offenses, while the highest offenses that people enter prison for are labeled violent offenses. The vast majority of the total population are there for nonviolent offenses. It used to be that residential burglary was the highest, the offense that people were most likely to go to prison for. Although that changed this last year. I noticed this today, that the majority of people going in, or the highest, the most likely reason that someone will go to prison, several of the top 10 are now drug-related offenses. And that hasn't always been the case, and so that looks to have changed. Is a brilliant friend of mine and has lots to add.
Yes, thank you, Zachary. And again, Kaleem Nazeem, the question, who are in our prisons right now, for what reasons, and why are people in prison?
Okay. Well, Zach, you really took all my answers, but I can just add a little bit more to it when we talk about the data. And the data, a lot of times when we talk about prison and why people are in prison, as you just said, Zach, the vast majority of people who are in prison haven't committed violent offenses. But the data doesn't support incarcerating a person who has committed a violent offense for the rest of their life, because when people who have committed violent offenses are released, they are the least likely to recidivate. So one reason for a lower recidivism rate for those who have committed violent offenses is because of age. And a lot of times the people that we have in prisons have age out of criminality. Age play a big part in what predicates a person to commit a crime. So when a person becomes a certain age, they started aging out of that criminality. And a lot of times the same person, just speaking of myself, I was locked up at 17 years old. I did 28 years and 11 months of incarceration. I've been out for 5 years now. I haven't committed a crime since I've been out. And I like to think it's not because of what the prison did for me, but through the maturation process that I went through, just a normal process of becoming a man when I was incarcerated, reduced my likelihood of ever committing a crime again. So when we say who is in our prisons, I would say we have a lot of people who are in prison who have did a lot of reform and corrected their behaviors. So just on a vast level, I think the people that the system, we basically do more punishment and for financial gains. For financial gains, it's the people that we are keeping in our prisons for the punishment segment of it in the financial gain, but it's not for the rehabilitative process. I like to also add to it that a lot of times the people that we see in prison, we have a high level of mental health issues that need to be addressed in our carceral system. Instead of people getting the proper mental health treatment, and also couple that with addiction issues, we have a lot of this here that goes undressed by those who are incarcerated. And I think, that's a big problem within our system. So with that, I hope I answered the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Nazeem. Moving on to our next question. What impacts do prisons have on the community, Mr. Crow?
Yeah, so again, these are big questions that we could spend a lot of time on. But I would start by saying truly be compromised or can't truly be calculated. And so I think of folks like Kaleem, right, who is a loving husband, a father, a caretaker, a leader in human rights, and
He looks different now. Who is
social
that?
justice movements. I think about what Kaleem means to his family and to the movements that he's a part of, and I know that Kaleem is one of 18,000 some odd people, right? And so that cost of like plucking that many people out of a community just can't actually be calculated. I think specifically though, one of the things that I would raise is that while this is certainly not the only impact on the community, I think we have to talk about the financial impact on a community when people in prison are forced to work in Arkansas at no pay. Arkansas is one of few states that forces folks to work at $0.00 an hour. We think about the way in which people are charged for phone calls, are charged co-pays for medical care, are charged for commissary, while being forced to work at no pay. That cost gets passed on to families, that cost gets passed on to the community. And so while there's a financial cost, there's also a human cost. And so that's what I would say before turning it over to my buddy Kaleem.
Yeah, once again, Zach, you didn't took all my answers, but I agree with it. It robs our community of its human capital. And a lot of times, as you stated before, Zach, a lot of people who are incarcerated is disproportionately among people who are in low income communities. So we got to think about when those people are snatched out of their respective communities, a community, it affects the nucleus. It affects the nucleus of the family, and and a lot of times statistics says that when a parent is incarcerated, it increases the chance for the child to be incarcerated, whether it's a male or a female. So that's a major impact on the communities that individuals are coming out of, and the economic cost also plays a part when that individual is incarcerated. When the family members, in Arkansas, is the people who are incarcerated receives no income for their labor. So the family members are shouldering that burden. So instead of decimating the community when the individual is incarcerated in the prison system. So.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nazeem. If you all are just tuning in, you're watching Issues That Matter, Boundaries of Justice, Exploring Prison Expansion, Overpopulation, and Impacts. This series is presented by the Central Arkansas Library System, the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County, and Little Rock Public Radio. This forum is being recorded for broadcast and will air at a later date on KUAR. Our guests are Zachary Crow, Executive Director of DecARcerate, and Kaleem Nazeem, movement builder, also with DecARcerate. And for our next question, it's sort of a two-parter. I want to kind of combine them, but and we will start again with you, Zachary Crow. What are the biggest issues facing prisons today, and also the biggest issues facing people who are incarcerated today?
Yeah. you know, I don't uh, 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 I don't claim to speak on behalf of Ed, and what we've seen time and time again is that there are issues of overcrowding, which we can talk about ways that those could and should be addressed, you know, tomorrow or 10 years ago. But there's also a sort of a companion to that overcrowding, which is massive understaffing. Arkansas prisons have been massively understaffed for a long time. And so Arkansas Department of Correction wants to build a new prison. The governor and the attorney general have been pushing that through our legislative session. And again, we can talk about that later on, but that growth. I think that's a good thing because I don't want to see the growth. But we do have to think about ways that the people who are incarcerated are being cared for. Understaffing means folks aren't receiving any form of mental health care, may not be receiving their meds, may not be getting fed on time, right? There's a direct cost to the people who are inside when there's understaffing. And so, you know, I think there's lots of reasons for that. It's a difficult job. And in many ways, I think people who work for the Department of Correction are, while that oppression looks very different, are not are being marginalized in some way in that work environment. And so I think if you know, if the problems facing the prison from operating as the state would like it to operate are both those of overcrowding and understaffing. I think both of those could be addressed easily by letting folks out. And we can talk about, you know, specific ways that kind of reduction of the prison population could be done without compromising the safety of folks. But yeah, that's where I would start.
Perfect.
And then as far as issues facing people who are incarcerated, I'm just going to turn that over to Kaleem. I have heard those. I have thoughts about that, and I have heard those issues from my friends and loved ones in prison. But Kaleem has about 20 years of knowledge that I don't have, and so I think it'd be silly to eat up any of the time he.
Well, I just think I thank you for sharing that, Zach. Uh, I think some of the biggest issues facing prison today are also the lack of education. There's no educational programs. The treatment that is meted out to individuals who are incarcerated, the inhumane treatment. Just fundamentally, the culture of prison hasn't changed since its inception in the United States, period. In the way of, you know, when you ask someone about prison, you know, you hear pejorative references like convict, inmate, things of that nature there, and the administration don't seem to have any plans of changing these dynamics as far as, you know what I'm saying, treating individuals more humanely. Then you have a lot of untreated trauma when individuals, you know, are faced with solitary confinement for 10 and 15 years at a time, and then, you know, are released to society with this post-prison syndrome, where they're really asked to operate as a productive member of society after being, you know, really tortured for years and years upon end. So these are big problems that we face in our society and in the prison system. So I think some of the biggest things that we need to do is restructure the way we treat individuals when we have them incarcerated. And I think one of the biggest things that we can start doing is educating people properly. So when they do return to society, they have the tools that they need to actually create a living, because I think we all understand that the same man that created the problem can solve the problem. So if you don't give the individuals that we have incarcerated a chance to develop new information and new ways to operate, then we're gonna forever have a rotating cycle. And I'm gonna use a phrase that Frederick Douglass said. He said, "Education makes a man unfit to be a slave." So once we educate individuals, they become unfit to be slaves in the Arkansas Department of Correction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nazeem. And as you said, Zachary, we will be talking now about the overpopulation problem. Arkansas officials have said that this is if not the biggest, one of the biggest problems in the correctional system today. They've put forth a few proposals, one of which big prison expansion in northern Arkansas. So in your opinion, what is the best way of fixing this overcrowding issue?
Well, the first thing that I would say is I think it's important to contextualize that this overpopulation didn't happen on its own. We've been manufacturing this problem as a state for a very long time through legislation. And part of the ways we've seen that happen is we have continually, I imagine for a lot longer than this, but in the 7-8 years that I've been at the legislature following these issues, I've seen over and over and over again the enhancement a sentence, and will rewrite the law so that will enhance the sentence to a higher offense level. You spend longer and longer and longer in prison for the same thing. The other thing is we're now making it more and more difficult to get out. And so at one point we had the fastest growing rate of incarceration in the world because we were sending people back to prison on technical violations at an incredibly alarming rate. We were sending people back to prison. These were not people committing new offenses. They were people returning on small technical violations. Now what we see is that while the return of people on technical violations has decreased, the prison population itself hasn't actually decreased, because over and over again, as a part of these policies, we're continuing to hold people for longer and longer periods of time. And given the fact that we just passed what was sort of anecdotally referred to as the truth in sentencing measure in the Arkansas legislature, we're now limiting the possibility of for parole for the majority of people that are being sent to prison. And so we will see this problem of overpopulation not being caused by the fact that more people are committing new crimes, but because we're holding people for longer and longer periods of time. The other part of the overpopulation problem has been in the last several years from jails to prison as quickly as they might otherwise have, outside of COVID. And so there has been an issue with jail backlog. That issue could be addressed easily by taking a serious look at who we hold on bail. So during COVID, courts and jails and judges were forced to OR, release folks on their own recognizance, as opposed to holding as many people on bail. That seemed to go fine. There was no uptick in crime. There was no uptick in people not showing up for court dates, all the things that the state says they need bail for. All of those things seem to go fine. And so I think one way we could address the jail backlog is by taking a serious look at who gets held on bail and who doesn't. I don't think there's any reason to hold anyone who has a non-violent offense on bail. That seems like an easy fix tomorrow. And so as far as the rest of that problem, the fact that we're holding folks longer and longer, we have to turn back some legislation. I think that's the path forward. I think legislators have to look at existing statutes, look at existing offenses, and we have to undo some of the harm. I think the most recent piece of legislation is one of the most detrimental that I've ever seen in Arkansas when it comes to these issues of incarceration. When we think about the growth of incarceration nationally, we think of things like the war on drug, perhaps the 1994 crime bill, all these kind of monumental watershed moments, the war on crime. And I think 20 years from now, we're going to look back at the bill that was just signed in Arkansas, and we're going to say that was a moment. That was a moment when folks should have acted, when folks should have spoke up, when legislators should have tried to undo as much of that bill as possible, tried to overturn pieces of that bill in courts, right? Like, I think the time to address this issue is now, or we're going to be suffering these consequences for decades. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, Zach, that the overpopulation problem can be solved very simply by releasing people, who have done the work in rehabilitating themselves. We have people in prison in Arkansas right now that have done over 45 years of incarceration, but haven't received a dictionary right or infraction since they've been incarcerated for the last 25 years. So it's just a lot of common sense need to be applied. We need to file more legislation, pass more laws to like a geriatric bill. When a person is 65 years and older, that's been locked up for 25 or more years, they should have a meaningful chance at parole. That'll reduce the population a lot. Just common sense laws, we still have people in Arkansas who have life sentences on drug charges, from drug paraphernalia to having possession charges, but they have life sentences and been locked up for the last 20 and 30 years. So it's things like that there that we need to reform the laws, turn back some of this tough on crime legislation that was passed in the 80s and 90s. So, and I think, that we decrease the population, the overpopulation of the prison system.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Nazeem. If you all are just tuning in, you're watching Issues That Matter, Boundaries of Justice, Exploring Prison Expansion, Overpopulation, and Impact. This series is presented by the Central Arkansas Library System, the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County, and Little Rock Public Radio. This virtual forum is being recorded for broadcast and will air at a later date on KUAR FM 89.1. Well, we've gotten a lot of great questions in the chat function. I want to thank all of our viewers for putting those in there. We're nearing the end of our pre-written questions, so just stick in there, all of our viewers. We will get to all of those questions just after these few. And please, if you have any other questions, use the chat function below on Zoom to enter them in. So moving on to our next question. In Arkansas, what is the state of healthcare in the prison system? And we'll start with you, Zachary Crow.
I've not experienced that healthcare system personally, but from what I hear, not great, pretty poor. And I think one of the reasons, and so I would say that's true both of folks who need medical care for physical ailments or diseases or physical issues, and then also I would extend that to mental health care as well. We care in our healthcare in Arkansas prisons is privatized. It's outsourced to a private company, and I think it's really dangerous when we bring private financial interests into the criminal legal system. And so we've outsourced to a company that has a financial stake in providing as little and as cheap care as possible for their bottom line. And so I think that's from at least folks that I've talked to, that seems to have a direct impact on the care that they feel that they receive. I was talking with someone today who was is friends with a woman who was sentenced to life without parole, and has had cancer and some very serious health issues for a long time. She's 90 years old and is now on life support. And so her story is that for decades she received incredibly poor care that made her conditions worse and worse. And then when the care became too expensive for the private company, they finally, at the very end, sent her to a hospital, which is where she's on life support now. And so, while this may be a particularly poignant case in the sense that this woman is so elderly and has been there for so long, while folks may not have experienced similar circumstances for as long a period of time, this woman is certainly not alone. Again, I'll pitch to Kaleem, who can speak from a personal place around this issue.
Yeah, the healthcare system in the prisons are horrible. From a personal perspective, I had to I finally got a hernia surgery, but I had a hernia for about 12 years of my incarceration, and every time I went to the doctor, they wouldn't send me out to get the surgery that I needed to correct the hernia because the cost that was associated with it. And then one time they hired this doctor, and she seen me. She like, I'm gonna send you to the hospital to get a surgery. And once the guys who were incarcerated found out that she was actually helping people and really doing her job, the ADC got rid of her because she was costing them too much money. So the co-pay systems that is operating within the prison system, where you have to pay just to document your problem, but you don't have to just pay one time. You got to pay 3 times, and each time you pay, you got to pay $3 just to get your problem documented, and you have to go to the infirmary 3 times before you even see a doctor. So it's really horrible. And for those who are listening, you may be saying that $9, you got to pay $9 to see the doctor. Well, we pay that more than that in copay out here, but you got to take under consideration that when you're incarcerated, the Arkansas Department of Correction pays you nothing for your labor, so you don't have any monetary funds coming in if your family isn't sending you money. So then the treatment is almost like, if you're not bleeding, you're not being taken serious. So if you're dealing with an issue where you have something internal going on with you, it may take years for it to be properly diagnosed. So these are big issues within the prison system, and that's that's not even taken into the mental health when people have serious mental health issues. Like I said, I stayed incarcerated for 28 years and 11 months. And I think I've seen a mental health staff as far as, a mental health clinician one time of my whole incarceration. So these are serious issues, and on both ends, whether it's a physical ailment or a psychological ailment, uh, your treatment is very poor, and it's very hard, and it's hard to get any physical help, and it's rare to get any mental health treatment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nazeem, for sharing your experiences with us. We really appreciate that. And our final pre-written question tonight, then we will be getting to our viewers' questions and comments after that. And again, starting with you, Zachary Crow, what is typically left out of conversations like the one we're having this evening? And I think you're muted again, Zachary.
Sorry. I said the wisdom of folks like Kaleem, right? And so one of the guiding principles of DecARcerate's work is that those who are closest and most impacted by systemic injustice are most equipped to offer solutions, but often furthest from the resources that they need in order to be able to do that. And so people who are directly impacted, particularly around this issue, are rarely platformed, rarely listened to, rarely heard, rarely given a microphone. The fact that the Arkansas legislature just passed a 300 some odd page bill about parole and probation without having a single conversation with someone on parole or probation seems reprehensible to me. And so while we need voices like Kaleem's on forums like this, we also need them in the legislature. And Kaleem shows up at the legislature a lot. He's one of the few voices that is directed, that's able to spend the entire day at a Capitol, given the nature of his work. Not everybody is able to do that and testify in that way. But the fact that legislators aren't proactively having these conversations with people who are directly impacted or their family members seems really problematic to me as well.
I think what's typically left out of conversations like this is that 80 to 90% of the people who are incarcerated today will be out one day, will be walking among us, will be in society. And we are fathers, we are mothers, we are daughters, we are brothers, we are sisters, we are caregivers, we are uncles, we are caretakers, and we are your neighbors. A lot of times when we don't treat individuals humanely, they're returning to our communities, our respective communities. And we should have conversations around how we're going to ensure that these individuals who are returning to our communities are more whole than they were when they went in. And only way we can make individuals give them a chance of being whole and healthy members of our society is we start reforming the system that is broken. And that starts with treating people with empathy, kindness, compassion, and knowing that people aren't throwaways. and we have to treat them like they're not throwaways when we have them in these houses of bondage. So I think the conversation should be sent. Come in, please. The conversation should be. Give me 1 minute.
You're totally fine, Mr. Nazeem. Sorry about that. And I guess we can wait while we are waiting for Mr. Nazeem to come back. We can
Give me 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Django, Django. Come on. Girl, you scared of dog.
Is Kaleem's
Get out. Get out.
beautiful dog, and apparently
It sounds like a dog situation. I empathize deeply.
My Yorkie was creating lots of trouble in the tech check before participating on, but for the good of all of us, he is finally behaving.
Well, it sounds like Django didn't get the memo that we're broadcasting here.
Yeah, excuse me.
That is no problem at all, Mr. Nazeem, and feel free to pick up where you left off.
Well, I just feel that we have to, in a sense, stop being practiced at turning our heads when it comes to the carceral system in the way that we're treating our citizens, because a lot of times I think in the way we think about prisons, we look at those who are incarcerated as a separate branch of our society, instead of looking at those who are incarcerated as part of our society. So once we start doing that there and embracing the ones who are incarcerated as part of our society, we'll start treating each other like human beings. So I think, it's important to infuse the compassion and empathy part into the conversation when we are having conversations surrounding the carceral system.
I'd like to add just one small thing to that before we move to questions from attendees. So Kaleem's too humble to put in the plug himself, but has written a beautiful, phenomenal book that you can get through DecARcerate about his experiences in prison, and particularly around this idea that he raised of the fact that the majority of people in prison are coming home at some point. And so the Arkansas Department of Correction does not allow folks to enter programs often, in many cases, until they're a certain time out. Kaleem would know the exact number of months, but certain number of months away from their release, which feels counterintuitive to me. I think a reentry plan, I think should start on day one, right? I think folks should arrive and have access to as much care, as many programs, as many resources as possible to better themselves and to prepare for release. And the fact that most folks aren't getting that opportunity until right at the very end seems like we're setting ourselves up for further and further failure when it comes to issues of recidivism and otherwise. So that's the last thing I wanted to add, and I'll stop talking so that we have time for others.
Great, thank you so much, Zachary. We appreciate your insights. So moving on now to questions from our audience here tonight. We're going to start with the first question here we got tonight from A.W. Mims. A.W. Mims asks, How many people who are in prison incarcerated never received legal counsel? How many people in prison are waiting on a trial date but can't afford bail? I certainly don't expect you to know an exact number off the top of your head. The anecdotal answers are fine, but just any insight on those questions, Zachary.
Sure. Yeah. So I certainly don't have, numbers in front of me. I think as far as legal counsel goes, I think most folks, at the very least, have access to a public defender. But the larger, I think, subjects perhaps of this question is that while there's maybe some form of legal representation, the vast majority of cases in Arkansas never make it to trial. That's true everywhere, but it's also true in Arkansas. Most of these cases are pled out, and so most folks aren't getting actual hearing in court, given the nature of how our system operates. The other thing that I would say, well, I can count on one hand in the 10 years I've been doing, this work, a handful of lawyers in Arkansas who do post-conviction work, right? So say someone is sent to prison and they have an innocence claim, or someone is sent to prison and may have the possibility of may need to apply for clemency, or may need to fight an appeal. Most folks don't have, the vast majority of people will never have access to legal counsel for those post-conviction needs. And so that I think that's true. I can't imagine many people, or most folks that I am in relationship with, never have that possibility unless they find, one of a handful of lawyers willing to do that work pro bono, or unless it's like a death penalty case where there's, federal public defenders assigned. And so that's the piece I would add around legal counsel. And then how many people in prison are waiting on a trial date but can't afford bail. So bail is not. I think what the person means is jail. We have a jail system and a prison system. Jail is where you would be, when where bail would be set for potential release. I mean, the answer is most people in jail. I mean, everyone in jail really is there because they couldn't afford bail. Because if they could afford bail, if they didn't set bail, they wouldn't be there. And if they could afford the bail, they'd be out, so everybody in jail. One of the things that's a real detriment to folks who are working in this area, particularly around bail, is that we don't have great data in the state of Arkansas around this. Courts collect data in a variety of ways. They're not all centralized. While some of that data gets sent from courts to the administrative office of the courts who compiles that, it gets sent in different formats. It gets sent in different ways. It's collected on different databases. People send different information. And so it's really hard to get a sense of statewide data around this issue. And so there have been a lot of attempts to sort of fix these data blind spots around this issue, but as far as I can, none of them have been particularly successful. Oftentimes there are jail websites that will list this information for the individuals who are currently in the jail, but it's really hard to get a hold of data over time on a large scale.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Crow. And Mr. Nazeem, the question again, how many people, just in your experience, how many people who are in prison never receive legal counsel, and how many are just in prison waiting on a trial date but can't afford bail?
Well, it's Zachary just mentioned that when you're in prison, you're not really waiting on bail. So, that's a different process as far as, when you're in jail, you're trying to, a lot of times, you know what I'm saying, you find yourself in debtor's prison for those who probably have $100 fine and can't, you know, pay it. So they spend 3 or 4 months in jail. As far as, you know, people who are in prison who I say 90% of the people or 99% of the people who are in prison uh, that had public defenders, you know, really had inadequate representation as far as, you know, their counselor going. Me personally, I was facing a life without sentence, and I seen my attorney twice. One time introducing himself, and the next time, he came down for 30 minutes and got a statement from me. And then basically, we went to trial. My trial lasted every bit of 4 hours. That was jury selection, the trial, and the sentences in all one day in 4 hours. And I walked out of the courtroom with a life without parole sentence. So then when you get in jail, I mean in prison, you have 30 days of what they call a direct appeal, and you have 30 days to understand the complexities that a lot of lawyers who spent 4 years of a law school don't understand, but you have 30 days to figure out how you're going to appeal the mistakes that happen in the court. So after 30 days, after your direct appeal has run its process, then you have the where you can appeal to the Eighth Circuit. But once you get to the Eighth Circuit and you don't properly appeal that, they put you up on under what is called a procedural bar. So in answering that question, technically, they provide you with a public defender if you don't have the means to financially pay for a lawyer yourself. So they, the courts provide you with a public defender, but it's real inadequate representation on for the most part. And that's because, in my opinion, not so much that the public defenders, you know, don't know the law, but they so overwhelmed with their caseloads that they don't have the adequate, they can't give your case the adequate attention that it properly needs. So it's bad.
The other thing I would add to sort of build upon what Kaleem has said is that while Arkansas requires judges to assess a person's ability to pay, it doesn't give a lot of guidance as to how they do that assessment. And so it's being done in lots of different ways. And so I've been in courtrooms where judges, while assessing a person's ability to pay, have asked a series of questions that to me have no bearing on a person's bank account or financial status. Things like, what kind of rims do you have on your car? Or what kind of car do you drive? Or, you know, tell me where you work, right? There's like no actual, you know, there was no conversation around, you know, paycheck. It was, you know, these sort of arbitrary things. You know, debt was not considered in any meaningful way. And so I think, you know, one of the blind spots that should be addressed is particularly what it means to address a person's ability to pay. I think there should be some more clear guidance around that, because otherwise it's sort of geographic based on you know, the kind of justice you receive based on whose courtroom you end up in and what process the judge decides to use on that given day. I'm sure there are judges who are doing a good job and taking seriously that mandate from the state and the law to assess a person's ability to pay. And I know for certain that there are judges who are not doing an adequate job of that. And so I think I don't think it's a given that if someone is in financial need of a lawyer, they'll automatically get it. I think a lot of that is determined by the process within the particular courtroom.
Well, thank you, Mr. Crow. We are running up against time right now, and I thank you all so much for participating. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do just want to get to one last question from our audience tonight. It's coming from Rip Weaver, who says that he heard the comment earlier, I believe it was you, Mr. Nazeem, who said Arkansas is not thinking creatively on how to handle its carceral system. So just both of y'all, do y'all know any examples of maybe other states or countries or even other communities in Arkansas specifically that are basically thinking outside the box on this issue, who are offering some creative solutions?
I'd like to bring up the prosecutor in Philadelphia. I think it's Michael Krasner. He's a progressive prosecutor. I think he's doing a great job with thinking outside the box on how to address juvenile behavior in the carceral system. I think it's called the Norwegian their prison system, how they're thinking outside the box as far as having a more treatment-based approach instead of a punishment-based approach. And I'm sure it's more examples out there, and I'll pass the baton to Zachary.
Yeah, so to Kaleem's point, we've seen sort of this push for, or this sort of progressive prosecutor movement around the country, which includes folks like Krasner in Philadelphia, but also Chesa Boudin and others across the country. I think some of that work is really around taking seriously this mandate on prosecutors that their job is to seek justice. Unfortunately, most prosecutors have historically equated justice with conviction. And that's certainly not always the case, or even most often the case. I think there are some models around prosecution that are interesting to look at, ways that prosecutors and defense attorneys can think of themselves as a more collaborative process than an adversarial one. The other thing I would say, with the time that we have, is we've seen lots and lots of folks in cities across the country, even recently, since the murder of George Floyd, moving towards reform around police departments, particularly the way in which cities deal with mental health and mental illness. And so there are cities that have almost entirely turned over mental health calls from police to social workers or third-party services. And so I think that given the number of people in our prison for offenses that stem from mental health crises, that's an important step forward that we're seeing in some places. We could talk about these models, and I'm happy to answer emails so y'all can find me.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you all both so much. That concludes tonight's forum. I want to thank once again our participants, Kaleem Nazeem and Zachary Crow, both with the nonprofit group DecARcerate based here in Arkansas. Thank you both for coming out tonight, sharing your experiences and your ideas. I think it was a very insightful conversation. This has been the latest panel in our Issues That Matter series. Please share comments on this forum and ideas for future forums by emailing comments@littlerockpublicradio.org or through any of the social media accounts of the Central Arkansas Library System, League of Women Voters of Pulaski County, and Little Rock Public Radio. Again, this panel will air at a later date on KUAR FM 89.1. And keep your eyes and ears open for information on the next discussion in our Issues That Matter series. Well, on behalf of the Central Arkansas Library System, the League of Women Voters of Pulaski County, and all of us here at Little Rock Public Radio, I want to thank you all for attending. Have a great night and be safe.